The first live telecast I have watched of Maradona playing was the opening match of the Italian 90 World Cup. It was against Cameroon, and everybody expected the Argentines to sweep aside the Africans. But even with players like Maradona and Caniggia, Argentina lost the match. And two things I still remember about the match was how the physicality of the Cameroon's game and how the spectators in the stadium rooted for the African team. It was played at San Siro, and the people of Milan despised Maradona for what he was doing at Napoli. If I remember correctly, Napoli had just beaten one of the Milan teams to win the Italian league. And Maradona made a couple of very nice observations after the match about the match. One was he said he didn't say anything wrong with the Africans winning. He said the better team won. Then secondly, he said he cured the Italians of racism. So it was referring to how the people of Milan rooted for an all-black team. That was Maradona. See, it was never about the results for him, and those who watched him also, it was not about the results, it was how he played. There are a lot of discussions now about who is the greatest of them all. Maradona was not just the GOAT, he was the God of football.
I must confess that I was never really a big Argentina fan, but I have always loved Maradona. In fact, watching him on television playing the 1986 Mexico World Cup was my first World Cup memory. I was only 8, and watching this short, stocky guy dribbling past rivals with ease, it looked so out of this world. And reading about Maradona's exploits in the newspaper, it was also so exciting and part of the charm back then. I think Diego Maradona was the greatest footballer I have ever seen playing. With all his skills and his flows, his allure was unmatched. Rest in peace, dear Diego. We will miss you.
In the year 2008, being a photographer, I was quite lucky to capture Diego Maradona in our homeland in Calcutta, which is considered as Mecca of Indian football. I remember the thousands of people gathered at West Bengal's, even India's largest stadium, Salt Lake Stadium, to watch him. And he was quite excited to see that gesture. I remember the organizer was organized a car to roam around the stadium, but he climbed up on the top of the car to cheering with spectators, and I catch him on that moment. I remember he is really fan of Jyoti Basu. He met Jyoti Basu and showing him some Castro's photographs at his residence. So being a photographer, it was quite excited moment for me to capture the god of football, Diego Maradona.
Today is a somber day for the sporting world as we have lost another legend in this wretched year that continues to take away icon after icon. Diego Maradona, one of the greatest footballers ever, has left us. A lot of tributes have been pouring in, people talking about their emotions on watching the great man and how they felt as kids, even in India, where for most years we didn't have a football team of our own to support or root for in a World Cup. Many turned to the likes of Pele and Maradona to fill that void. What people miss, or what hasn't been talked about, is what actually made him a god on the field, the technical aspects that made Maradona great. So I'd like to turn to Karthik and Ruben and ask them, what made Maradona great?
Well, to put it simply, on his day, Maradona was unstoppable. And people talk about his skill, the dribbling and all that. There are other aspects of Maradona's game which have not been talked about as much. It's how tenacious he was, the aggression, and Obviously, the low center of gravity was helpful in him in manipulating the ball and getting away from opponents. But there's also things like the vision, and then he was exceptional at breaking the offside trap, which is something that is understated. And then he was good with both feet, good heading ability, even though he was only 5'5", a great leap on him. So he was, I think, a very complete attacker and with great football intelligence. So I think we tend to forget these things because of his dazzling display of skills. But it's not just the skills that made him great, it's the overall mental makeup as well as the will to win, which we have seen in abundance. Apart from the skills, like I said, he was also a grafter. He worked for the team that people tend to forget because of his persona, because of the problems associated with him. But he was a hard-working player, he was tough and he was very aggressive. And naturally he was, and obviously he was very skilled. So we should not forget that aspect of the game also.
For me, two things stand out when I think of Maradona. Because I think I was born the year he played his last World Cup, so I can't really talk about his technical abilities as much as what somebody who watched it live. But two things that actually stood out for me all these years was, one, his leadership ability to be able to rally a team of not so great players to win a World Cup in that 1986 thing. He was one of those men who could really get 100% out of his players, just go in there, locker room talk sort of thing that not many players can really do. And leadership quality was definitely one thing, and that he could stand apart from them and say, I want you to follow my example sort of thing. And you give me the ball, you do everything you can, give you 100% on the field and you will win that World Cup, that sort of attitude. And another thing that absolutely stood out for me for Maradona as a character was that deep urge to prove that he was an underdog who could rise above everything else. Because every step that he's taken in his career, whether it was from the slums to go all the way to Europe, or whether it was to move from Barcelona to Napoli, the world record transfer, everybody was like, what the hell is this guy doing? Why would he do something like this? But he always proved that he could go to a city like Napoli and really resurrect that team, which we saw as him doing as a player, and also surprisingly doing as a manager when he did that in Mexico. He went to Mexico, pulled out a small team that was absolutely just doing nothing, and he took them all the way to the final. And that was also another really big thing about Maradona as a personality, that he could command those things from his players.
That's a good point he brought up, especially with that manager bit also. So it's not about just the individual genius of the person. It's like a rising tide lifts all boats. So he did that for a whole team, for multiple teams. So that leads us to the question that everyone has been talking about for years, the GOAT, the greatest of all time. So Pele, Maradona, and then Ronaldo, Messi, a lot of names get thrown about. So in this day, after we've lost the great man, there will be a lot of people who now claim that he was the best. Was he actually the best, and can we set apart the emotion and talk only about his game and say whether he's the greatest of all time?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to be objective about this, because when you see Maradona play, you are mesmerized. But then I think there's two ways you have to look at it. So when you talk about the GOAT debate, people tend to look at longevity. So if you look at that, Maradona will suffer there because he had problems. But what I also want to look at how good each player was in his prime. So like I said, prime Maradona was, I think, unplayable. And a lot of people have said that in the 86 World Cup against England, the hand of God, that sort of gave them an advantage. He scored a great goal after that. But if you watch that match, the entire match is available on FIFA's YouTube channel. So if you watch that match, it is very clear that first half was very cagey. But at the beginning of the second half, Maradona was starting to take the match away from England. So as a player who could do that at his peak. But I think if you look at all these great players in their peaks, I have a feeling that Maradona might edge out Pele, and the only competition really would be Messi. And Maradona had some distinct advantages over Messi, like greater physical strength and the other mental attributes that we talked about. Messi also has that, but Maradona is slightly stronger in those aspects. Right now, because there's a debate between Ronaldo and Messi, it's very close. But I think that if Maradona had been able to stay at his peak for like 10 years, that debate would not have been there. He would have been like the sole
Outright.
candidate for the GOAT. But unfortunately, it did not happen. But yeah, that's what I feel.
Yeah, for me, the thing is, as fun it is, to talk about the GOAT, we can debate this as long as we want. It'll just go on and on. It's always going to remain a very emotional issue for a lot of people, because like I was recently telling somebody that for different people it's different things. Beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, we say. For a particular person in this particular country, he watched a particular player grow up to be a status that they've never seen ever in their life, and that person is the GOAT to that person. I mean, to that particular individual. Say for example Roger Milla, for what he did in the World Cup in the 90s. And I think with different circumstances, with different generations, the circumstances change. Can we really say whether Maradona would have been able to do it against the super rich clubs that Messi or Ronaldo face for 10-12 years now? It's really hard to say.
The quality of opposition keeps improving.
Yeah,
it improved from Pele's time to Maradona, and now the quality of opposition that Messi and Ronaldo is facing, it's much superior in terms of technical aspects as well as physicality. It's much superior what Maradona faced, without question.
That's without question. At the same time, also Maradona single-handedly did it. We kind of see that it's possible to do this in sports now, and I try as much to try and evade the GOAT debate. But for me, for me personally, Messi will always be the GOAT, because I have seen what he does day in and day out, and it's just unbelievable. So, yeah, I prefer not to take a stance, but I think everybody will have their own say on this.
See, like you said, it's very difficult to talk about it without seeing entire matches, and a lot of them. Like there's not, like I said, there's a lot of things like off the ball movement, how they get into space, how they ask for the ball from their teammates, 1-2 passes. So a lot of things which go unnoticed. Yeah. It's not just about the goals and the skills.
So talking about the GOAT debate, and you brought up Messi, obviously a successor to Maradona, taking that country, and Messi is yet to lift the World Cup.
Yeah.
So that
he probably never will.
We'll do another video about that later. But the question now is that what legacy does Maradona leave behind? What do you think he represents or represented for a nation, for the world? What will his legacy be moving forward?
Yeah, to me, he'll always be that mad genius, that kind of I don't think we've seen too many of that in sport, or even in, we've seen too many of that in football especially, because I guess in the early 1900s and all, it was a very crazy sport. There were a lot of mad tackles and all that, and it became a much more civilized sport over time. But what we saw with Maradona was a mix of madness and genius that I don't think we can say anybody like that exists today in football, and that's the kind of legacy that you leave behind, because you're so good and yet so crazy to do all those things, to fight your way through things, to meddle with drugs and the mafia and all those things, and yet emerge, with that kind of class. Another thing that I think a legacy that he will leave behind is that, yes, team sports can be heavily influenced by individuals. We talk so much about how football is a team sport. We talk about tiki-taka and all those things, about beautiful football and all that. But yes, at times there's just one mad guy who will just do it, and you know that an individual can just change a game like that.
I think that for me also is the biggest point, that Maradona is the biggest example of that I remember of a person single-handedly changing a team game. It's not just with the Argentina World Cup win in '86. Napoli won 2 league titles when he went there. So before that, Napoli was not even challenging for the Italian title. He went there and he won 2 titles for them, and he was brilliant throughout. So that is the most consistent phase of his career, the prime of his career. But he had problems in between that also, with, like he said, about the mafia and drugs and all that. So, but he did make a huge difference single-handedly. And I think, everybody, like young footballers, can look up to that aspect of his game, with the drive, not the problems, but then the drive to do things. And he always put the team ahead of himself. It's easy to say that Maradona is selfish. He's not. He had flair. He was able to do things individually, but then he always put the team ahead of him, and he did, he produced great things for the teams that he played for. So I think that's something that a lot of people can learn from. The attitude and the belief that you can, beat the entire world, basically. That's what he believed in.
So to wrap up, all we have to say is that I don't think there'll be another Maradona, especially with the way the professional setup now is. Any young player would be actually groomed and nurtured in a way that doesn't go into the Maradona sort. But again, the point about the mad genius, Maradona always seemed like a person who knew he was great and he took it on as a responsibility. He didn't shy away from saying that he was the great. He knew he was great and he would help others out, and all we can do is talk about him and talk about his greatness, and even though he's left us, we will continue doing that for years.
I don't know how to express my feeling because I got the opportunity to sing with Maradona in Calcutta recently. I was really blessed to sing Spanish, Italian and Cuban songs with him during a football match, charity football match, which was organized by the great Saurav Ganguly. And I would like to sing. Yesterday when I heard this news, I took the guitar and took the pen and I wrote a song for tribute song for Maradona. It's a song about goodbye. Goodbye in Spanish is adios. Adios, Diego Maradona. Goodbye, Diego Maradona. Goodbye, Diego Maradona. Goodbye, Diego Maradona. Adios, Diego Maradona. Adios, Diego Maradona. Your hands were blessed to conquer the world. Your hands became the hand of God. Your hands and hearts touched me a lot. Your love with a smile will never die. Adios, Diego Maradona. Adios, Diego Maradona. Goodbye, Diego Maradona. Goodbye, Diego Maradona. Adios, Diego Maradona. Goodbye, Diego Maradona.